Europe. That's all right. Continue recording progress. All right. So, and the funny thing is that for me, I never planned to ever serve in the government. Actually, for me, my plan was become a guy who makes money out of other people from knowing how to hack and break into places. Because for me, when I started cyber or I started hacking was 1999, just before Windows what was it? Windows 98 came out in Kenya. We were using 3.11, something like that. And I was really enjoying myself. I know when I was trying to connect a Unix machine and like that, a Unix machine and a Windows machine, and using a command line to understand the operations, how they work on the network. But in 2007, something changed because of what happened after elections, and we lost people, especially on the side of family in Molo. And I decided it's better with my skills to join government. And that was around mid 2007. That's when I started now doing things like training at DOD and other things for the CID. Those days they were called CIDs. And other things that I was doing during that time. And that's how I started by serving. And then I went to work for NATO in Middle East. And I came back and I joined Cyber Command at NYCT, which was a task force developed by different agencies to help with defense of Kenyan government. So these are stories I'm going to share with you. Since I started Cyber Command, as it was called a C3, we did more than 30-something operations. Most of them, half of them are heavily what do you call it? They're heavily classified, so I will never talk about them. I'm not supposed to even mention them. But there are others which are not so much classified, and some of the others are actually on the public domain. Most of them you already have witnessed, only that do you know where some of these operations were performed or where they were operated from. Thank you, KFC. So I think from here we are going to do part 1, and I'm hoping you're going to get at least part 2 and part 3 and part 4 at times sooner. So let's begin. So as you've told, my name is Gichuki. I'm the current CEO at Onde Group. I don't know why it is hanging. All right, we're back. All right. I never wanted to become a CEO. It's just that I was forced by people. They say that we needed someone who is on both sides, on management and on the trenches. So I had to take over the role. And it's one thing that is very taxing, because I never thought being a leader in your organization actually as it is for me right now. The thing I've learned about being in the public sector is how to plan operations and how to defend the country and how the governments work. And our objectives when working for government security or looking to national security is the stability of the country. That's always the end of the objective of that organization. But in the private sector, what we learned that the end goal is always the money that you're going to make. It's not about anything else. It's not about most of the clients. What they want is to know that they are going to make money, which is the biggest difference between working for the government and working for the private sector. So the main lesson of learned when dealing with adversity is actually the same. These are people who are always behind the keyboard. These are the guys who are always planning how they are going to execute operations and how they are going to attack your organization. So if you stop thinking about, it's good to think about the network points, but if you push yourself to think that these guys who are attacking you, these guys who are trying to steal your money are actually people. And if you deal with them directly, you get to a point where you defend your organization properly. And that's what it came to us, that when you're dealing, we were fighting with adversaries in GCN, or when you were pushing hackers out of the network, we knew these were people. And so we had to approach it as if we were dealing with human beings on a battle space. The other lesson I learned, which is very important, I don't know why okay, it's working. I learned because of working with what you call intelligence community and also militaries, is that plans are everything. Plans are nothing except planning is everything. You have to plan and plan and plan for everything you're going to operate on. You have to develop a course of action. You have to understand the commander's intent, all those things that actually come when you're developing an operation and then running it. So disclaimer, as you know, I might not be able to talk about anything sensitive. I need to be able to leave this conversation with my clearances for every agency I usually work with. most of the information I'm going to give you are things which are on the public domain, and I'll try my best to actually showcase some of the things that you already know, and for you to understand the inner workings of how that such operations were done against adversaries out there. All right, so I don't know why my keyboard is not working properly whenever. Okay. All right. All right, so we're good. All right, so on the left, that's me when I was working at a task force, which was on KRA. It was called the KRA Cyber Operations Center, which is KCOC. And on the right is when you had just developed Cyber Command, which was at ICT Authority in 12th floor. It was a joint command for running operations for the government, especially when you are dealing with adversaries. On the ground there is us when you are tracking some hackers who are working at Gichuki. So we had to actually break into their Wi-Fi's and the other networks which we were using at the campus. I don't remember the name of that place, just next to the campus where they used to lie. What happens is that Fokobombom was the kind of recruiting young boys or young men from the universities and colleges, and actually using them to attack government infrastructure. Down there is us, as we figured out that it's important to us to actually make sure that we are developing tools. As you can see from that screenshot I just realized that it's actually showing you the tool I was developing at that time. This was about 2015 when you're developing loaders that were meant to help us breach into Fokobombom's network back in 2015, 2016. And we had, because I had a very good background in C, and so we're learning Windows API and making sure we get better into it when writing offensive toolkits. It was difficult at that time, but we tried and pushed on, and obviously we became better, and we were able to actually write some of the best tools that are out there for developing frameworks for running offensive operations and collection against targets on the ground. So you all know right now we are on the domain which is called the information domain. What happened is that we were on land for several years. That is back even before the Roman Empire. Then people realized we can use C to attack other nations through on the other side of the ocean or the other side of the lake. And people started developing boats and other materials that can be used for running operations and attacking and spying against other countries. Then people realized that we can use air either to defend, attack, and also to spy by developing planes, which are now flying all over and picking up whatever they needed. Then people realized that later on, earlier last decade, that space can be another domain of warfare, whereby we can actually be able to spy on people from the ground, and also actually put missiles just at the space stations or other space for militaries, so that you can actually even put weapons and other military combat effectiveness preparation, and in a way that you can actually drop those payloads from space to the attack or to the AO from space, which is very different. But then the internet came around the 90s, I think 80s and 90s, and people started developing capability to use that to either spy or collect intelligence or even disrupt and destroy targets. And this is where right now we are. By then, we were just calling it cyber, because you are only running effects on target by saying like they're just going to do a penetration or an exploitation. But things have changed, especially because of the Russians, whereby people are even not just using penetration and collecting. People are using what they have collected to actually disrupt or even disinform or even create an illusion about the target they're working on. And that's why we changed and say that because we wanna be able to engage all aspects on the information environment. That's why it's called the information domain. Because obviously you're going to use things like expectation of a spectrum, like maybe GSM or any other radio airwaves or other things that you're going to use on social media, all that stuff. Like now when you see people doing what you call hacks and dumps, that's a huge IO, or rather just a huge information operation that was ran to actually bring a newer or better effect that lands the next sequence of operation on the target. So those are some of the things that Kenya needed to develop, because we were under attack on all right and left, including the biggest famous hackers that people know that were in Kenya back in the days, which were called the anonymous hackers in Kenya. So as you all know, 2012, 2014, Kenya government infrastructure was always under attack. We had several attacks going on for the web servers. And one of the biggest attacks, as you remember, was Ministry of Defense and also the Deputy President and email servers and Twitter. And these anonymous guys were actually doing a little bit of damage there. And not only, the funny thing is that not only we knew as Kenyans in the public that the government was only being attacked by anonymous, but actually the story is much more different from all that. You also heard about KDF. This guy is blocking the Twitter account by breaking into the email servers that were at MOD. It's funny that actually Deputy Ruto email server was at GCN, and the email servers for KDFs were on a different network, which is on DOD network in Hurlingham. Then also, as the attacks enraged, the hackers went ahead and started being political, whereby they started insulting the president, insulting the deputy president, and also they were also insulting and saying CS Lenku is clueless. I think you remember when they broke into also to Interior website. I couldn't find the screenshots for Interior. I would have shown you so many screenshots I had on my operations database. And these guys were actually defacing and making it political so that they can bring a lot of stories and noise to the media. And it was a little bit of hectic and jokes and fun for all these guys. Because most of these guys were young guys, and some of them were led by people who already knew a little bit about these things. And these older guys were pushing these young guys to actually execute these operations without leniency at all. Then you also had them talking to bloggers and pushing their messages out so that they can actually be able to be seen as higher hackers in what they were doing. Then through all that came the development of one of the biggest coup that had more operations on its jacket. It was called the Ikonini crew. I think you guys remember it. A lot of people joined even not knowing what was really going on, because it was always on social media, especially on Twitter and Facebook. I mean, Twitter and Facebook, yeah. And they ran a lot of operations, and they were joined together later on by another hacker group that was called the Mau Mau hackers. So those are some of the stories I'll go ahead and demonstrate and let you know. All right, so with Kenya government under attack from 2012, PS demo was then by the PS information, decided it's very important to actually bring experienced group of cyber operators. But that time is when I had just come back to Kenya, and I was thinking about taking on another contract overseas. And I was called in by one of my friends who was close to PS. And then I found out that later on when he went for that meeting, it was very early in the morning. I think even Frederick was there and some other team members who were there, we were called very early in the morning, around 7-ish, I think. And we were there very early, and the meeting started. And the PS demo was telling us how they under attack and how they want people to come and help them develop a capability for the country so that we can actually defend ourselves against nation states and also defend ourselves against anonymous in Kenya. Later on, after that meeting, they made a selection from how we answered our questions during that meeting, how we explained things, and interviews were set, and then tests, and then we had background checks done, and this was pushed by then the CEO. By then, he was not the CEO; he was like assistant chairman or something like that at ICT board. Before it was changed to ICT authority and given the funding to actually execute and build a cyber capability for the country. But then he was Victor Chalo of PS. He became PS later on around, I think, 2016 or 2017, I think so. Then by that time, the CSs were switching off and were switching over. And we had the president Kibaki leaving the government, and we had the new president coming in. And Matiang'i was by then, PS Matiang'i was up then, but then the CS 2014 MYCT. And he's the one who said that we really need this place, because I remember at that time is when the insult started on websites. And we had about 100 websites or something defaced by other hackers in a different area. And he decided that he really needs to have this room open. It was then called the Black Room. but it actually was one that developed now what we call the cyber command as we know it. By 2015, enlargement of teams was required. That's when we had what you call this thing for presidential something, where people from college and universities and other places are joined in to come and learn and operate and work together with people who are already specialists in the organization. I'm forgetting the name. Oh, Digitalent, yeah, Digitalent, and it was actually headed by PS Charlo by then. By later 13, by then we had already started spinning up the team so that they can actually be able to start running operations and building capabilities for the country. By late 2014, we had already started testing the whole network that the government was using. So that that's when the TDR was developed and later renamed officially as C3. By end of 2014, a report has already prepared after testing and analyzing the vectors and vulnerabilities that can be used to attack government. And during that time is when now we started setting up the team that would, because it started by actually 3 guys and started actually expanding up and up and up as it went on. Because we realized that there was a very huge need and we are being attacked right and left with the government infrastructure. And you need to make sure that it becomes harder and harder for them to actually exploit. So the teams were divided into 3. There was the guys who are doing CNE and CNA. They work together, the guys who are doing CND, so that research can come into the new innovation and other operations so that can actually be able to collaborate and operate on the cyberspace. The CNA, the guys who are doing now operations for collection and attacking back and the adversary pursuits were called the Online Operations Action Team, the OOAT. Then you have the people who did CND, people who are doing things like incident response. They're working together, the guys, the CNE, because the guys, the CNE was already they had already had very good experience out there dealing with adversaries. So that exchange of platform was really important for us, and we're able to actually run responses, get intelligence, and go after adversaries, figure out who they are, and collect information about them. If there's a need for disruption, there's a disruption done, and all that stuff. So these guys work together, and also people at CRT also did what you call management of log servers, hardening of servers, and make sure they're monitoring what's happening on the network at that moment. And also migrations of boxes, because that's another thing that we did that was very, very important. Then you had people doing research, and those the guys would study trends, and then they would bring it over to the desks for the other guys to go through what they found out. And then all that exchange was very important so that we kept our teams ahead and moving on. All right, so better outcomes to be in front at the battle space, we had to have better capabilities than the adversaries. Speed was always supposed to be on our side, but most of the time you find that we were already overtaken, because most of the guys who are coming after us, or guys who are actually going after our network, were well funded. People from China, we had attackers from other countries, like we had a very huge attack that came from Iran. I remember they were going for Minister of Foreign Affairs back then, just when you were starting up. And all these guys were well funded than actually the Kenyan guys, and they were many than us. So the operations were very difficult. Sometimes we had to sometimes you had to work like from Monday to Saturday in the morning. You have no sleeping, you're just knocking off maybe 1 hour in the morning around 6 on the desk. Then you go on, continue working on running your operation. It was very hectic, but we performed, and we really tried our best to defend the country. Innovation and research, most of the time, this stuff of doing research, reading, studying, and figuring out new ways really saved us. It really saved our butt a lot there, because if we didn't know some things, I think some of the stuff we were trying to work on and defend against would have really gone the wrong side of the road. Some of the top adversaries that we dealt with, one of the biggest one that we started with were the hacktivists. These are the guys like Anonymous and the Lone Wolves, and other guys who are doing attacks by supporting other parties which are the opposition to actually make the country look bad. Then also we found cyber mercenaries. These were the worst, because these guys were not law enforcement. They were being contracted by other organizations to actually be in a position to collect intelligence from government infrastructure to understand people they were looking into. And you remember that we had so many problems with some of the people who are in the leadership and other people who are in the government. They are known to be collaborating with bad guys like drug dealers, etc. So you find companies overseas were being contracted to get into the network to collect intelligence against these guys so that they can actually be able to know what's being planned and what these guys are doing. We also found a lot of government agencies from other countries. That means UKUSA, the Five Eyes, all of them do all over the network. And it was very easy for them to collect and fight over targets because the network that was being used by the government by that time, the GCN, was flat and naked. Collection was very easy for organizations. Actually, one of the organizations that really made a very good collection was China, because it had gained access to transport and also other organizations, especially industrialization and transport, to make sure that they collect information that will help them to pick up tenders. There's some noise. There's some noise. To pick up tenders that they needed for road constructions. Then we had the normal Eastern African financial threats and others who are coming from Ghana. The ones who are coming from Ghana were not looking for money per se. Their job was mostly encryption and then pay. Encryption and pay. That were not so serious, though they went for a few organizations in the government. Then you had people who just wanted to sabotage things, and they used what they had and the access they had to do so. And also we had insiders and also so famous jihad guys who are doing online jihad. Those are some of the things that we actually were always being told to make sure that we actually defend and work on. And during that time is when we developed what you call the cyber kill chain or the cyber command kill chain. It was different from what you hear that what they call that position that brought the cyber kill chain. It was called I'm forgetting the name. It's on Lockheed Martin. Yeah, it's a company which is in US. What happens is that when you're dealing with warfare or when dealing with a battle space, it depends with what you have in front of you, and that's how you develop the framework that you use to defend and attack with. And this requires that you need to understand that life in this battle space is very different. The most important part for any military organization or any intelligence organization is to make sure there is stability and civil support, which means that warfare goes step by step in a way that there could be a time when the life is stable, everything is stable, and that we usually call it peacetime. And then a few things start being unstable, and this is during peacetime, and this is when the violence starts increasing, and this is called the unstable part. And during this time, unstable parts or stable times of during the peacetime is when you do things like strikes, raids. We show some form of force. That's for mostly military, or actually even intelligence. They will try to do some of those things. But during the peacetime, you see things like trainings. You see things like normal local espionage. You're seeing operations like recovery operations, counter cyber operations, maybe like counter drug operations, stuff like that. And now from unstable parts of peacetime, we shall now go to what you call insurgency. And this is what you saw with Al-Shabaab, and we were dealing with normal preventions of conflict and also things like trying to make sure there's peace around them. But actually, if you notice, Kenya, we are surrounded by countries which are very unstable. Because if you look at Sudan, the other side of as it approaches to Kenya, we have something called the Janjaweed. Then, if you look at Ethiopia is a little bit unstable, especially right now with these things going on in Tigray. Then on our east, we have the Al-Shabaab and Al-Qaeda. Then a little bit on the other side down in Tanzania. We are just lucky right now they have become better. But I'm telling you, in the future, you might see a lot of stabilities. And then you look on our side of western side, we have the Ugandan himself and his staff. And you never know what would go wrong there, because there everything is like a dictatorship that's going on. So Kenya, we are just surrounded by things that are going wrong anytime. So we need to make sure that we know how to deal with these things earlier before we reach to a point where we have things, what we call irregular warfare, which happens during insurgency. Then after insurgency grows, we have what we call the warfare now. This is the major combat, or rather, this is when a country is fighting with another country to do something kinetically. And you're just so lucky that in Africa, in most parts of Africa, we have never got into such a situation this decade. And things can change anytime. It's important that we actually have the upper hand. And that's the reason why all these agencies work very hard to make sure that these things are good. All right. So I'm going to talk about the first major operation that we did immediately we got into Cyber Command. It was called Back to the Future. I'm going to let you know why it was named that. It was funny because what happened is that the first thing we need to deal with was the hacktivists, because that was the most embarrassing part, because we realized that most of the organizations in governments were really complaining, especially the presidency was also complaining because of the insults and other things that are happening. And also a little bit because of the online jihad that also going on from Al-Shabaab and Al-Qaeda. One of these days, I'm going to talk about that because we had several operations that are done to defend our country from some of the things that are being, some of the objectives that Al-Qaeda and Al-Shabaab had online and the online operations, which actually some of them actually you have seen online, you have noticed because they have been talked about by several media organizations. All right, so with the first major operation, it was called the Operation Back to the Future. The reason why it was called Operation Back to the Future is because what happened is that all the websites, I remember you had very nice websites written in Joomla, some written in WordPress, other written in the other older one, it was called Drupal. And what happened is they were very vulnerable and people are not fixing them, and they were running on a very old Fedora. And each server was having like almost 100 websites, which is very, very wrong. You should never host your website on a server that hosting more than 10 websites, because you never know which one is going to be one variable that's going to get you powdered by adversaries. So what we did was that we had to remove all these Drupals and CMSs and have static websites that looked like those pages used to have in 1980s and 1990s. And so that's why it was very funny, because we had to call it Back to the Future, because everything looked like it was 90s static HTML stuff with even less CSSs. And actually, if you notice that during that time, people are saying government doesn't know what they're doing. They would go online and start insulting government, saying that you guys have very stupid looking websites. But you never knew that actually the reason why we were doing that is because we wanted to make sure that we wipe out everything and start from scratch. So what happens in the mail servers is that we had to move all the mail servers that were in GCN out of GCN into a different network that was developed for eCitizen and Kentrade. So the network is called the Kentrade, if you know it. So we put all the servers there. They were all in CentOS, and we moved emails from people for anything other than Zimbra to make sure that it is standardized for security purposes. And then I think we needed to do was to make sure that those email servers that were running cPanel, because actually, if you remember those days when you install cPanel, it was installing, I don't know if it does that still, I've not installed it in a while. It would change the bash installation and other reforms installation inside the operating system, which means you do not have control of your server with cPanel running and changing the effects of things like kernel, services, and all those things. So if you needed to work with a server that was very secure, you needed to actually develop your own, make sure that you make sure that your website are loading directly either from Jeans or Apache. And if you have MySQL, you're running MySQL by your own installation, not by installing cPanel. The other thing we notice is that we need to make sure that our websites and our email servers are actually in the country. Because what happens is that if you use a service overseas like Gmail or Yahoo, they are in a different country, they're in a different law or environment, which means that if those guys want to be watching your emails, they can just get a subpoena, especially because you're Kenyan, they can be reading your emails whatever they want. And this is the problem also that we had in the government, that all our secrets, because most of the guys were using Gmails, all our secrets, all our plans were being intercepted by Ukuza and Five Eyes. So it was very easy. And you know, the funny thing is that if Five Eye are intercepting your email and they have an insider inside the organization who is giving information maybe to Russians or giving information to Iranians, that information can trickle down to our immediate adversaries like Al-Qaeda, which means that it's very, very important that the government employees and contractors had to use official emails, so that in case any organization out there, APT, cyber mercenaries, or any other, if they want to gain access to emails for any employee or any contractor working for the government, they had to hack into the server, and that would mean they would spot them. And that's what happened, because after he moved, the server started spotting some of these guys trying to exploit this server. And the good thing is that we could do adversary pursuit and locate where they are attacking from. So moving the servers that were inside GCN was very important because that was a very good targeting and intrusion service for some of these organizations. Then the other thing we have to be sure is make sure that all services that are being used by the mail servers were hardened and were being monitored, such that we had like every operator had more than 4 big screens, and each screen had a terminal or several terminals named according to the server they were monitoring. So you find a terminal there written mail.information.glk. Then you're going the tab. It has several tabs. Which one of them is showing a tail of maybe access logs or a Zimbra log to see who is accessing mail, and then another one is looking at the mail queues and all that stuff to see whether there's any kind of spamming going on and stuff like that. So it was actually more easier to actually be in a position to actually harden and actually monitor these attacks. Then, as I said before, we had to remove all the websites that were vulnerable, and actually every website was vulnerable from GCN, that is a government communication network. And what we did is that all the servers that were being used for web services were supposed to be moved from normal Linux to BSD. And this is where it brought trouble for most of the activists, because you find that not many people know how to operate native Unix command line, and that's why we defeated them a little bit. And also, you know that BSD, the way it actually divides the operating system from the services you're using. So for you to cross over and actually deface the other website, it was going to be a lot of work unless you find a serious vulnerability that cannot be bypassed to kernel level. So all the websites were moved to static for almost a year. That was around 2014. Our websites were looking as if they just came from hell of burn or fire. And then all MDAs had to bring in their data of what they want to the website. And then new programmers were brought in to actually start working on TMSs and building and developing new websites for every MDA. By MDA, I mean ministry, department, and agency. Then the other thing that was very, very important is before the website goes online, it has to be taken to R&D network, where we had to do a lot of testing before the website was moved to the public. Then before it was moved, it was handled and monitored and checked, and also then uploaded later on for the public to use. So the effects, or rather the requirements or objectives that happened that actually helped us a lot with this stuff is that, first of all, we had to make sure that all the BSD web servers that we were actually setting up that hosted at least 10 sites. This was very important because we needed to make sure that if you are actually monitoring 10 websites from one server, we cannot be in a position to be taken by just one website. So the hackers, when they came back, if they tried and they wanted to deface 100 websites, they had to hack 5 servers or 10 servers, which was cumbersome for them. This was only if it was a government running an information operation on us, but so that they can actually be able to get us confused. But what we did was that to make sure that every server has 10, the hacked face had trouble figuring out what to do from there. So this made sure that the hacked face had minimal effects against us, and it became much more harder to actually be able to operate. Foreign governments also realized what you've done, especially the Chinese. So what they did was that they started changing the TTPs. Most of you, I think, you understand what I mean by TTPs. What they did was that instead of using the normal hackers were using before, the guys who are doing hacking the servers and collecting information they need, or using a DOS to attack GCN so that they cannot confuse the people on the network or not to understand when the data is being copied out. What they realized is that now servers are being taken out to a different network, and they are different. They look different. What they did was that they started trying to see, can we start phishing the administrators, because they already had the emails of these guys, and us on our end, we could actually see the phish. We could pick up those PE files and just look at them, and we would be like, these guys are really trying, because they went ahead and now brought much more better guys to try and see if they can attack the government. So what we did was that we started realizing that some of these admins might get infected. So we told them they need to start moving to Linux and Unix machines. And this was a fight. It was met with a lot of resistance. So what we did was that we started realizing that for them now, this is because they were being targeted by the Chinese, or being targeted by also other governments, which I won't name here right now. What we need to do was to make sure that they don't have as much access as they had before. And so access was minimized. And if they wanted to do any changes on the servers, they had to do something called a change request, so that we don't get ourselves owned by most of these attackers. All right, so I'm not going to talk about a lot of major operations or operations. I can see time is running out. This is the last operation I'm going to talk about. When you have part 2, I'm going to continue and let you learn it and see how we did it. The next operations are called Operation Save Home. This was about saving our network and saving our government organizations from the face of public bad image. And the target was mostly anonymous hackers in Kenya. So we had to do what we call preparation of the battlefield, which means we need to understand the adversary in an important manner. And this was hectic because it was more almost an interagency operation. And this means that we pick up the mission, then you do the mission analysis, then you develop the course of action and check the requirements that are required for that course of action. Then get the approvals from the directors or from the commanders, and understand the intent of these commanders and leadership. And then the orders would come down, and then you start running operations as it is, and the intents are needed by the operations, by the leadership and the commanders at that moment. So one thing that was that part of actually planning for the mission was the most important one, because you are repeating to what the bosses are telling you and trying to figure out the things you need to do to make sure that the effects that, or the objectives or requirements that the leadership has requested are done to the effectiveness. And this means that you are looking at one part of the operation, comparing it, what will happen next, and making sure the sequencing of the operations is actually adequate as you target, as you actually go for the target at that moment. So preparation of the battlefield was very, 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 very important. If they're not planned, and if they're not planned properly, you would get into trouble. So as per anonymous in Kenya, I'm not going to go so far in this because the time is out. I made sure that I did something that would take at least 40 minutes, and now I think it's already past 40 minutes. So what happens is that Africa, the main umbrella for anonymous was called the Anonymous Gorilla. And their job was to put all anonymous together, anonymous in Uganda, anonymous in Mozambique, anonymous in South Africa, and also anonymous in Africa. So they had given out IRCs, they had given out dark web servers, and they had given out sharing servers, they had given out what you call news servers, and they would even help with editing of videos and other stuff. So Anonymous in Kenya had at least 4 major groups. We had the one, which is actually a lone wolf, what you used to call the same Anonymous Kenya. This is a guy who would push all the other hackers, tell them what they're supposed to do. He didn't know, or he didn't know about hacking, but he was very, very political. He understood the effects of what was supposed to be done to actually push the government into knowing that there is trouble brewing anywhere, and they can actually be able to make changes in the government and bring some level of changes. Then we had another group which was called them hackers. This was a branch out of the group from Ikonene. Then the biggest group we had was a group called the Ikonini crew. And then we have one of the dangerous hacker groups we dealt with, which was called the Mau hackers. It was developed around 2015, and I think some of the members also came from Ikonini crew at that time. So I'm going to explain these things later on during our part 2 on this Operation Save Home, when we get another chance of actually meeting. So this is an extract from one of the classes that I usually do. It's called CNO 206.1. And during that class, we train either military organizations or intelligence analysts and operators on how to conduct mission. And actually, I've already talked about this, where you're receiving a mission, you do mission analysis, then you develop COA, then you analyze the COA, then you compare and dismantle the operation. Then the actions are approved by the leadership, and then the orders are dismantled, and then you start the operation. So I'm hoping that soon you're going to continue and get more into our stories and stuff, and maybe I can explain more on Operation Save Home, and we can talk much more from there and get time when we continue. So without further ado, let me see if you have any questions, and we can actually be able to answer them. Thank you. Hope there will be questions today. Buddha Chairman? Hello?
I even lack what? I think people can just proceed to questioning. Edwin, you are here. I think you can moderate to see how it goes. Edwin?
So I'm hoping that at least we can have a part 2, part 3, part 4 at least in the future.
Yes, but sasa hiyo ni ya kutoa pesa.
All right.
Well, what I know, these things, there is so much to share. And I think we don't just take it for granted that you're finding time to share this knowledge. Well, whoever has a question can ask. Edwin, I hope you're there.
You can put the microphone on for anyone who wants to ask a question, so that because I'm not looking at them, I'm not looking at the messages until the end of the conversation, and I'm hoping you can see there are some people in government by default who work. What happens in any organization? If you have 10 people in your organization or your employees, 8 of them are not going to be working. 2 of them are going to be working. It's the same thing in the government. You have 1,000, maybe 1 million employees in government. 80% of the government, people who are in government don't work, they don't do anything. But there's a 20% of people who really risk their lives and work so hard to make sure the country is in a better position. So let's see other questions. Or should I check from the messages?
Yeah, actually, thank you, Gichuki. Yeah, there's, I can see a question. Namasa John is asking, what is the meaning of COA? Yeah, maybe you could expound on that.
All right. COA is the cost of action. When you're developing an attack phase, like let's say you are, okay, let me give a very good idea of something I saw a while ago. Actually, it's something I've used when I'm training. You remember Die Hard 4? For those people who have watched Die Hard 4, a lot of people thought Die Hard 4 is just nothing, but actually for someone who has worked with offensive cyber, you notice that Die Hard 4 shows you the plan of what this guy did to raid effects on the center of gravity for the government, that is government of United States. And what he did was that he ran an operation called Operation Fire Sale to make it look like it is terrorists who are running the operation. And eventually what he was actually doing was that he was going for the money that was, I don't know what that place was called, low something, where money was, everything financial for the government was transferred there. So for him to lay that plan, a course of action was developed, which was war gamed between him and the people he was working with. That's the same thing that works in real operations. You plan and you analyze and you go through with the leadership, explaining all the filters of the plan that you go through to actually get to the end point of the requirement laid out by leadership. Yeah, I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, so I hope that is clear. Yeah, so I'm trying to check on the chat area. Okay, now I'm going to open it up now for any member to ask the question or any question directly to Brother Gichuki. Any person?
Hey, this is deep, eh?
Yes, Cliff. Continue.
I used to think I was working very hard. I've just listened to you. Then I realized even those command exercises we were doing, it was nothing to what you went through. So that meant you had to do a lot of learning of the military operations. So that meant the command warfare and the issues of maneuver warfare. So then that means now that has come to the 5th dimension. Eh? That's the cyberspace.
Yeah, it's called the information domain, or rather the cyber domain and information environment. That's actually the stage we are in right now for warfare. It's very hard to actually see a tank coming into Nairobi. What will happen is that effects will be done first upon information operations, So that, like what happened in Estonia. What happened is that an information operation was ran so that people will not see the green men coming in into the country. So you are actually wondering, why is my TM, or why can't I pay via PayPal, or why can't I be able to buy my groceries? So that in a point that you all get confused, you don't notice there are tanks and little green men in your country. So actually you find that information operations usually complement other domains during warfare.
Now, one thing that troubled me for many years,
Yep.
If you look at the defense headquarters, it is in between. Defense and Army headquarters is between the Russian embassy, the Iranian embassy, and the Chinese embassy.
Yep.
They're next door neighbors.
Mm.
How do you secure that? Because of the sniffing of the Russians, they were using satellite communication, and I mean.
Yeah. The thing is that DoD already knows that. That's why major combat and major operations were moved to Karen, where National Military Command is, NMC.
Okay.
Yeah. There is just normal MOD work from the CS, which doesn't